So, as I started writing this script, the Miami Heat and Jimmy Butler were in a bit of a stalemate. Jimmy said that he wanted to be anywhere but Miami, but a trade took forever to materialize. There had been some trade destinations, but Jimmy shut them down, making his anywhere but Miami statement false. The team also placed him on a 7-game suspension, but they were open to bringing him back if he didn't get traded. Eventually, a move was made to effectively end the Jimmy Butler era in Miami. No matter how the season ends, it is safe to say that this is another case of a legendary player being pushed out of South Beach. It was rough to see all this go down, especially to a player who people felt could retire as a member of the Heat. But how did we get here? Before we get into the fall, let's talk about the rise of the Miami Heat with Jimmy Butler. When LeBron left Miami and the Big Three era was officially over, the Heat were a very directionless team. They did have a fun year in 2016, but that was the best that it would get post-Heatles. After losing Dwayne Wade in free agency and Chris Bosh to a medical retirement, the team didn't really have anyone to latch onto. Our options were an inconsistent Hassan Whiteside or a Udonis Haslem that was seeing less and less time on the floor. Goran Dragic was also pretty cool, I guess. 2017 was when it looked like the team had completely bottomed out. Sitting at 11-30 at the midway point of the year, it seemed like they would be in a spot that they hadn't occupied in almost a decade. But, for better or for worse, this was not to be. The Heat would win 30 of their next 41 games, finishing 41-41 and missing the playoffs because of a tiebreaker. This is where I was introduced to what we know now as Heat culture. The brand of this team was built more on gritty hustle plays and little flash. Unfortunately, they really wouldn't build on anything in the next 2 years, with the main highlights being the return of Dwayne Wade and his farewell tour. There wasn't much reason to think that things would significantly change following the 2019 season. Besides up-and-coming center Bam Adebayo and 2019 first-round pick Tyler Hero, maybe Josh Richardson if you are a real sicko. Little did they know that another star player would be willing to pull them out of the mud. By 2019, Jimmy Butler had established himself as one of the better players in the NBA, but he had also built a reputation as somewhat of an emotional guy. He was a blue-collar guy, someone who was built to be the leader of a locker room. He wasn't afraid to tell you how it was, as proven by his infamous exit from Minnesota the previous year. This all landed him in Philadelphia, giving us a team that could have won the NBA title if Kawhi Leonard didn't get the perfect bounce. Jimmy was still playing at an all-star level, but multiple factors would lead to him not staying in Philadelphia. He didn't like that the front office had concerns about controlling him. He had issues with 76ers coach Brett Brown, and it seemed like the team leaned more towards Ben Simmons when it came to primary ball handling. Butler was a free agent in 2019, so where would he go? Well, I think his decision was inspired by the beginning of his career. You know how I mentioned that he had a blue-collar mentality and he wasn't afraid to tell it like it was? He carried this mentality everywhere he went, and it was sparked by the team that drafted him, the Chicago Bulls. And in his final year in Chicago, one of his teammates came from a culture that was very similar to that of Chicago. This teammate was none other than Dwayne Wade. Butler and Wade had immense respect for one another. Wade looked to be selling on Heat culture while they were both in Chicago. Both the Heat and Butler had similar work ethics. They were both honest and tough on each other and themselves, all with the end goal of winning a championship. It really all seemed like a match made in heaven. After a massive 4-team trade, Jimmy Butler would be sent to the Miami Heat. This was met with some criticism and confusion. A lot of people wondered why Jimmy would leave Philadelphia, a team that was on the rise and one shot away from the conference finals, for Miami, a team that finished 39-43 and really didn't have much upside. Sure, he would be the number one option, but he wouldn't leave Miami anywhere far, or so they thought. The Heat started the year white hot in Butler's first year. An 11-3 start would eventually balloon to 27-10. The best part about this start was that it wasn't just the Jimmy Butler show. There was a good amount of growth and consistency in this roster. Goran Dragic was still a reliable scorer, Bam Adebayo had elevated his game to an all-star level, and Tyler Hero showed potential with some clutch shots. Something also happened here that started off cool, but would eventually become frustrating because of the team's need to live and die by it. This being developing undrafted players. Both rookie point guard Kendrick Nunn and second-year sharpshooter Duncan Robinson had breakout seasons. Like I said, cool stories, but we would rely way too much on these kind of guys in later years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before we get to the playoffs, I just want to highlight this game against Atlanta in December of 2019. This game produced one of the most insane team stat lines ever. Jimmy and Bam became the 11th duo in NBA history to record triple-doubles in the same game. Kendrick Nunn scored 36 points, and Duncan Robinson scored 34 points by hitting 10 threes. Trae Young told the crowd that the game was over, and all that did was make the Heat score 22 straight points in the fourth and overtime. Nothing crazy. It's also important to note that the Heat did shake up the roster a bit at the deadline. They sent James Johnson to Minnesota, and they sent Dion Waiters and Justice Winslow to Memphis. In return, they received Jay Crowder, Solomon Hill, and Andre Iguodala. At the time, I was sort of lukewarm with this deal. James Johnson was falling off, and Dion Waiters hadn't done much either besides his incident on the team plane. I was just holding out some hope that Justice Winslow would finally develop into a good player. But in hindsight, this was a great deal for Miami, as evidenced by their performance in the playoffs. The Heat were 41-24 before everything shut down because of the pandemic. Fortunately for them, the NBA would continue the season in a bubble at Disney World, starting off with the 8 games to finalize the playoff standings. The team didn't look great, only going 3-5 in the 8-game stretch. This didn't affect their standings, however, pitting them against the 4th seeded Indiana Pacers in the first round. This matchup did have a little weight to it, because of the focus placed on an unexpected role player. Earlier in the year, TJ Warren and Jimmy Butler got into a bit of a fight. When the matchup between Miami and Indiana was announced for the playoffs, Butler didn't think much about this rivalry between he and TJ, declaring it dead. But there was still some hype surrounding Warren nonetheless. I don't know if many remember, but TJ Warren was balling out in the bubble. He averaged almost 27 points per game during the restart, including having one of the most random 50-point games in NBA history. Some thought that if he kept playing at this level, Indiana could have a shot, but that didn't happen. Miami swept the Pacers, but it wasn't a completely lopsided series. The margins of victory were 12, 9, 9, and 12. It mainly came down to team depth, as nobody on Miami was head and shoulders above the rest. Goran Dragic was actually our leading scorer. Butler was good, but there weren't any times that he really needed to put the team on his back. It's important to note that Indiana was missing Domantas Sabonis. I do think this would have impacted the series, but I still believe that Miami would have won. Regardless, Miami had won their first playoff series in 4 years. What made this even sweeter was that Philadelphia, the team that traded Butler, was swept by Boston, leading to plenty of dunking on Twitter because of what was said before the season had started. Many Sixers fans and talking heads believed that they would be competing for championships while Jimmy was chilling in Cancun. But now the tables had turned. The second round saw Miami match up against the Milwaukee Bucks. This team was no joke. They were the best team in the NBA, and they had both the MVP and Defensive Player of the Year on their team. But Miami had beat Milwaukee twice during the season. Me personally, I was just happy that we were in the second round, and I hoped that we would keep it competitive. Well, we definitely did more than keep it competitive, and Jimmy Butler was a huge reason for that, mainly because of his efforts in games 1 and 3. In game 1, Butler dropped 40 points on 13 of 20 shooting, and in game 3 he dropped 30 points on 7 of 13 shooting. He also hit the game-winning free throws in game 2, preventing Miami from fully choking away a game that they easily should have won. The depth from the Heat continued to shine, but I think the standout role player from this series was Jay Crowder. This whole bubble run made him one of my favorite Heat players, as crazy as that may sound. He didn't always show up, but when he was on, he was on. His best work was this series against the Bucks. 15 points per game on 43% shooting from beyond the arc. A much needed jab in the arm for the Heat offense, since Tyler Hero's shooting had gone down quite a bit. Miami's defensive game plan was great. Erik Spoelstra coached circles around Mike Budenholzer. The plan was simple. Make someone besides Giannis beat you. Clog the paint and make Giannis throw it out to someone else. This worked, as Giannis' average field goal attempts and scoring numbers were reduced, and his teammates couldn't make up for it. The Heat dismantled the Bucks in 5 games, and they were on to the conference finals. This series win also intensified the rumors that Giannis could be on the move during the offseason. He hadn't signed an extension, and he was 7 years into his career with no ring. He had been linked to Miami for quite some time, and although it wasn't certain how he would fit into the offense, the idea of Giannis, Jimmy, and Bam together was very tantalizing. The Heat would face the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals, reigniting a rivalry that had been lying dormant for 8 years. This was another series where Jimmy was good, but he didn't have to carry the team. Jimmy averaged 19 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists, and this was good enough to be the 4th leading scorer. Bam Adebayo, Goran Dragic, and Tyler Hero were all balling out this series. Bam had one of the best moments of his career in Game 1, stuffing Jason Tatum at the rim to secure the win. Bam and Dragic were also cooking in Game 2, leading the team back from a 17-point deficit to go up 2-0. Game 4 was the Tyler Hero game. This guy, who was a rookie, scored 37 points on 14 of 21 shooting, with 17 of his points coming in the 4th quarter. Holy hell. Game 6 was another scoring barrage. The usual suspects were involved, except Andre Iguodala, who had been relatively quiet scoring-wise, dropping 15 points without missing a shot. So the Heat were back in the NBA Finals, this being their first appearance without LeBron James or Dwayne Wade. Speaking of LeBron, that is who Miami would be facing in this championship series. The Los Angeles Lakers did not have many issues getting through the Western Conference, and they were heavy favorites. You know before how I mentioned that Jimmy didn't really need to carry the team before in these playoffs? Well, that was fun, wasn't it? This was an uphill battle from the get-go. Dragic and Bam were gone after Game 1. Bam would come back and play okay after missing 2 games, but Dragic was basically out for the whole series. He didn't come back until Game 6, and even then he wasn't the same player. Missing these guys put way more stress on everyone else to fill that void. So guys like Kendrick Nunn, Kelly Olynyk, and Myers Leonard had to be given important minutes in the series. Let me tell you, if you're starting Myers Leonard in an NBA Finals game, you're cooked. Anthony Davis was just looking at this dude and Kelly Olynyk like they were barbecue chicken. The only reason that this series wasn't a sweep was because of Jimmy Butler. For God's sake, the dude almost averaged a triple-double. He did all he could to make this competitive. It's just too bad that nobody else on the team could really keep up with him. His best performances came in Miami's 2 wins. Game 3, down 2-0, Jimmy had one of the greatest finals games ever. A 40-point triple-double on 70% shooting, along with 4 stocks and multiple big plays and shots to keep Miami in it. Game 5 was even better in my opinion. He dropped a 35-point triple-double on nearly 60% shooting. On top of all this, he was going shot for shot with LeBron James. Multiple clutch shots and defensive stops helped the Heat keep their season alive for at least one more game. This is also where we got that iconic picture of him hunched over the barricade after being fouled. If you needed a picture to describe Miami in this series, it was this one. Want to note that he only rested for 48 seconds in this game. I guess there must have been something special in that big face coffee, or maybe Rachel Nichols was giving him some extra motivation. Miami got slammed in Game 6, which was rough. Looking back at it, it was really cool to see my team in the finals, but I was still bummed after this game. My fraternity all got together to watch Game 5, one of my favorite sports memories, and it also helped that Miami won that game. Didn't do that for Game 6, and Miami got wrecked. I just remember going to my dorm at halftime, sitting on my bed, and eating a big bag of chips. My brother is a Lakers fan as well, giving him forever bragging rights. So yeah, great season, just not a great night for me. Last thing I'll mention before I move on, Duncan Robinson said that the Lakers bench kept calling him Jimmy Neutron, which is ridiculous. Like, come on now. Everyone knows that Duncan Robinson looks like Sheen, not Jimmy. At least get your references right, Lakers. The 2021 season was basically a write-off for both Jimmy and the Heat. The fatigue was obvious from every team that made a deep run. The season started a little over 2 months after the finals ended, which is an absolutely insane turnaround. The offseason was strange. They didn't do much to add to the roster. I guess they didn't want to mess with a good thing, even though the team didn't win a championship, partially because the depth couldn't keep up. Even then, they didn't bring everyone back. Former dunk contest winner Derrick Jones Jr. left to go to Portland. I like Jones Jr., but I do see why they let him walk. His role had significantly decreased as the playoffs went on, and he was becoming excess goods. What I didn't like was them letting Jay Crowder walk. For all his flaws, he was still a solid 3-and-D guy who fit well with the team. They let him go because he wanted to sign a long-term contract, while the Heat were trying to save cap space to potentially sign Giannis in next year's offseason. All well and good until Giannis decided to sign an extension. Whoops. Should go ahead and add him to the list of superstars that Miami missed out on during this era. So, Miami's offseason moves were mainly just re-signing some players from last year's team. Their primary additions were Avery Bradley, Max Strus, and Mo Harkless. They also drafted center Precious Achiuwa with the 20th pick. It's a shame that almost none of these moves worked out. Avery Bradley was injured to hell, Mo Harkless was just awful, and while it was hoped that Achiuwa could be a good backup for Bam, that never happened. It also didn't help that he was taken one spot ahead of Tyrese Maxey on a team that didn't have great depth at the point guard position. I tell you, Pat Riley loved to draft Kentucky guys, except when he didn't. This whole season for Miami was a slog. They started out the year 7-14, and it looked like nothing could go right for them. They would somewhat bounce back, getting to 22-18. From this point though, they would remain stagnant. They didn't look like world beaters, but they also weren't awful. I remember that Jimmy was having a really good stretch of games, and the Heat started promoting this Jim VP campaign. Was Jimmy having a great year? For sure. But MVP? Probably not. That was between Nikola Jokic and Chris Paul. This isn't a slight on Jimmy though. This was one of his best statistical seasons in his stint with Miami. He led the league in steals, was named to the All-NBA third and defensive teams, and he had already moved up to second all-time in triple-doubles for the Heat. The production from the rest of the team? Bam was still improving, and Duncan Robinson was still shooting lights out, but the rest of the team really lost a step. Goran Dragic was finally starting to show his age, Kendrick Nunn began to regress, but the biggest disappointment for many was Tyler Hero. His stats did improve in his sophomore season, but I think many, myself included, expected a much larger leap because of what we saw in the bubble. He came back down to earth and was mediocre as a result. This year was also the year of really funny commentary moments, the first being in a game against the Pistons in January. I don't know exactly what Blake Griffin did to Eric Reed, our play-by-play announcer, but he spent the whole night calling Griffin washed. It was completely unwarranted, but by God, it was hilarious.
Even though Blake Griffin scored only 3 points and took just 2 shots in the first half. It's a different Blake Griffin these days. Blake Griffin's 3rd foul, so Griffin has as many fouls as he has points.
This season also gave us the "Oh my goodness, Valentine" call from the Bulls broadcast, which is another legendary call. As the season continued, the Heat were struggling. The roster needed a shakeup if they wanted to get back on track. There were rumors that they could get LaMarcus Aldridge or Kyle Lowry, but that didn't happen. I think it's safe to say that the first trade wasn't originally in the cards. Myers Leonard, their backup big who they had re-signed in the offseason, was declared out for the year after only 3 games because of a shoulder injury. He had spent most of his free time live streaming, and on one faithful day, he decided to get very colorful with his language. I'm not going to repeat what he said or even play the clip, but just let me say that this slur is typically thrown in the direction of a Jewish person. He was immediately reprimanded for this, being fined and suspended from the team. I know he claimed not to know what that word meant, but come on. I find it hard to believe that you use that specific word without knowing what it meant. The Heat had no choice but to get rid of him. They sent Leonard and a 2nd-round pick to Oklahoma City for Trevor Ariza. Not a bad return for someone who did absolutely nothing. They also sent reserve big man Chris Silva and Mo Harkless to Sacramento in exchange for Nemanja Bjelica. Not bad, Silva wasn't doing much, and Harkless was horrible. I guess they were trying to get a decent power forward that could shoot, but the big catch would come later in the day. The Heat sent Avery Bradley, Kelly Olynyk, and a 2nd-round pick to the Rockets in exchange for Victor Oladipo. On paper, another solid move for Miami. Avery Bradley hadn't played a game in nearly 2 months, and I can never stand Kelly Olynyk. Seemed like that guy would always take the worst shots at the worst times. Like I said, getting Oladipo seemed like a good move, but there was a catch. The dude was made of glass. I know this wasn't his fault, but it still sucked to see. I really liked Oladipo. He was solid whenever he played, but he was never able to consistently get on the court. He was with Miami for around 3 years, and he only played in 54 games. They also signed journeyman big Dwayne Dedmon for the rest of the year, continuing their eternal quest to find Bam a good backup. Also, I gotta quickly shout out Udonis Haslem. He hadn't been a regular rotation player for quite some time, mainly being brought out at the end of the year. In one of the last games of the year, his first appearance of the season, he came in, hit 2 shots, got in a fight with Dwight Howard, and then got thrown out. All this happened in like 3 minutes, by the way. It was so dumb, yet so funny. The Heat finished the season with a 40-32 record, good enough for 6th place in the Eastern Conference, and it was also good enough to avoid the play-in and match up with the Bucks for the 2nd straight year. The consensus was that this was probably the worst case for the Bucks. We saw how Miami played against them the year before. Sure, Miami had struggled, but everyone saw how the Heat and Jimmy Butler turned up in the playoffs. Game 1 made everyone think that this could be a great series. Most of the players on the Heat couldn't throw a grape in the ocean, but they were still in it. Duncan Robinson and Goran Dragic were balling, and Jimmy Butler did send the game to overtime despite his struggles. But then Chris Middleton happened, and Miami lost Game 1. But it's okay, Miami just had an off night and they still almost won. If our players show up, we still have a chance to win this series. No. The rest of this series was like that hydrogen bomb versus crying baby meme. The margins of victory were 34, 29, and 17. It was embarrassing. You go from making the finals to getting swept off the face of the earth. I get that none of the other bubble teams that went far got past the first round either, but at least they won a game. Nobody on Miami showed up, the worst of whom being Jimmy Butler. This was probably the worst playoff series of his entire career. The dude was putting up concert dates, and he got outscored by Bryn Forbes. Bryn Forbes! Do you all know who that is? I know who that is, and he sucks both on and off the court. This was the one time that Jimmy got worse when the playoffs came around, and everyone was sure to let him know about it. The Bubble Guppies memes were thrown around a lot, and I remember that even the Bucks Twitter account got in on the dunking. It was all dumb but understandable, except for one guy. This dude Mo Harkless wanted to make some jokes, but no. There was no way this guy was trying to dunk on Miami when he averaged a little over 1 point per game when he played for them. I only have 15 less points than he did in a Miami Heat jersey, so he was the last person that needed to be cracking jokes. The Bucks would go on to win the NBA Finals, showing that Giannis didn't make a mistake by signing that extension. After basically running it back, it was clear that Miami needed a real significant addition. Point guard had been an issue for Miami the previous year, and depth of that spot had been an issue for even longer. Goran Dragic had been good, but he was starting to slow down. As much as the team and fans loved the Dragon, it made sense to move on and get an upgrade. So, during the offseason, the Heat sent Dragic and Precious Achiuwa to the Raptors for Kyle Lowry in a sign and trade. At the time, I really liked this trade, at least until I saw how much he was getting paid. Signing a 35-year-old point guard to a $90 million contract looked questionable then, and it looks a lot worse now. It was just good that we didn't really give up much to get him. I liked Precious Achiuwa, but I don't think he would have developed into anything crazy in Miami. Even now, he's just an okay backup big man. It did suck to lose Dragic though. He had been with the Heat for 7 seasons and was a face of the franchise. He was one of the few bright spots on the team when they were in the mud, and I wish there was a way that they could have kept him. This basically signaled the end for his NBA career, as he bounced around the league for the next 2 years and retired in 2023. The remainder of the offseason was centered around continuing to add depth to the core of Jimmy, Bam, and Hero. At the time, it still made sense to believe that this group could go far, as they really only had one normal season together. They added Markieff Morris and PJ Tucker, and they re-signed Victor Oladipo. The other moves all involved Miami's favorite thing, undrafted players. They signed Duncan Robinson to a 5-year extension, along with re-signing Dwayne Dedmon, Gabe Vincent, and Max Strus. They also got Caleb Martin from Charlotte and signed Turkish rookie Omer Yurtseven to a multi-year deal. After a somewhat slow start, the Heat finally looked like a team that could compete for an NBA championship. They started off 13-9, but eventually the wins would start to pile up. Amazing what can happen when a team is given more than 2 months to rest and recover. What was so good about this team was that it seemed like anyone could go off at any point. Jimmy played great and got voted into another All-Star game, while also becoming the Heat's all-time leader in triple-doubles. Bam was playing at an All-Star level until a thumb injury put him out for almost 2 months, but the depth was able to make up for his absence. There was a point where Omer Yurtseven looked like Dennis Rodman with how well he was cleaning the glass, grabbing double-digit rebounds in 14 straight games. This set a franchise record for consecutive double-digit rebound games. PJ Tucker also had one of his best offensive years at the ripe old age of 36. He was a pretty good 3-and-D player for Miami, and it seemed like he would never miss a corner 3. The guard depth also saw a great improvement. Tyler Hero, who had struggled a bit in the prior season, found new life as the team's 6th man. He was able to provide an offensive spark for the second unit, and as a result, he was named the NBA 6th Man of the Year. Of course, his shooting numbers still weren't amazing, but I think that says more about the award than Hero, but he was still good. Duncan Robinson's numbers did go down, but he was still a solid 3-point shooter. Max Strus took full advantage of his first year with significant minutes, averaging a solid 10 points on 41% shooting from beyond the arc. Kyle Lowry wasn't exactly lighting the world on fire, but he made up for his lack of scoring with good playmaking and facilitating. He was a different kind of point guard that we had been needing for a while, and Gabe Vincent was solid as his backup. Now, I would say something about Markieff Morris, but his time as a rotation player didn't last long. Tensions would rise at the end of a blowout loss to the Nuggets in Denver. After getting a rebound off a Bam miss, Nikola Jokic would start to take the ball off the court. He was met by Morris, who threw an elbow into his torso. Jokic responded by full-on shoulder tackling him in the back. The teams got tangled up, and Jokic was ejected. After the game, Eric Spoelstra said that Morris was okay, but the actual results were singing a different tune. Morris would be out for over 4 months with a neck injury, and he was eventually diagnosed with whiplash. Once he came back, he wasn't a part of the rotation anymore, which sucked because he wasn't that bad before the injury. This is also where we got that picture of all the Heat players standing outside the Nuggets locker room waiting for Jokic. I'm sure they just wanted to have a friendly chat with him, but the Nuggets security didn't want that to happen. This picture is pretty cool, but it's also pretty funny, because you got this assortment of players getting held back by 2 security guards, one of them being just a big bald guy, and the picture quality was very high for some reason. It was almost like they set this all up. This season was weird as well, since we weren't at the peak of COVID anymore, but we still weren't completely out of the woods. Teams were allowing full capacity crowds into the arena, but players were still regularly contracting it, causing teams to have to sign relief players on 10-day contracts. That's how we got things like Lance Stevenson on the Hawks and Joe Johnson on the Celtics. All these signings would help set an NBA record for the highest number of players to appear in a game in a single year. The Heat wouldn't suffer too much from this, but we did have to bring in a few relief players. Nick Stauskas and Kyle Guy were both brought in. Guy actually had a really good first game, scoring 17 points in a win against the Rockets, but he still wouldn't last long. The weirdest yet coolest of these signings happened in December, when Miami signed 2-time champion Mario Chalmers to a 10-day contract. I remember how hyped I was when they announced this. I figured that he wouldn't be around for long, but it would still be cool to see him play again. It was just too bad that he never played a game and was sent to the G League after his 10 days were up. Like I said, very cool, but very strange. The Heat ended the season with a 53-29 record, finishing as the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference. This was the first time they had won 50 games since 2014, and the first time they had gotten the 1 seed since 2013. They would match up with the 8th-seeded Hawks in the first round of the playoffs. These playoffs are what people think about when they talk about how Jimmy elevates his game. Game 1 was good, but it wasn't anything crazy, at least for Jimmy. Duncan Robinson was the player of the game, dropping 27 points on 9 of 10 shooting off the bench. What was strange that was, after this game, Duncan Robinson basically fell completely out of the rotation for the rest of the playoffs. Spoelstra opted to start Max Strus, and he decided to give more minutes to Tyler Hero and Caleb Martin. I guess since Strus was normally matching Robinson's production, Spo felt it made sense to give more time to better scorers and defenders. But the rest of the series would basically be the Jimmy Butler show. In a 10-point Game 2 win, he scored 45 points on 60% shooting, and he primarily did so by finishing at the rim. Although he did still hit a few threes, one of them being the dagger that put the game away. Game 3 should have been another easy win for Miami, but they kept getting in their own way. They had double-digit leads multiple times in the second half, but they still couldn't get the job done. This isn't exclusive to this era of Heat basketball either. For some reason, over the last 10 years at least, when Miami would get a big lead in a game, they would just forget how to play basketball. And no matter how many times I saw this happen, it would never cease to annoy me. Thankfully, Butler and the Heat bounced back in Game 4. The entire starting lineup scored in double figures in this 24-point win, and Butler was once again the star of the game. After scoring only 20 points in Game 3, he upped that to 36 points on 57% shooting. That was something else that was great about Butler in these games. Whenever he put up these high-scoring efforts, he was always doing it at an extremely efficient rate, and he understood when he would need to take over games for certain stretches. Now, Game 5 looked like it could pose more of a challenge, since Miami would be without Jimmy Butler. But it ended up being alright, as someone else would step up in his absence. Victor Oladipo, someone who had only played 8 games during the year primarily because of injuries, had one of his few good moments in Miami. He scored 23 points, stole the ball 3 times, and got a late assist that would put Miami up 2 scores with less than a minute to play. After not even allowing Atlanta to get a shot off in their final possession, the Heat secured the win and the series. This was cool, but expected. The next round is when things would start to pick up. The Heat would match up with the Philadelphia 76ers in the second round. A good match on paper, but the Sixers would be coming into the series with an immediate disadvantage. In their first round series against the Raptors, star center Joel Embiid would suffer a fractured orbital bone after being elbowed in the face, putting him out indefinitely. With this news, it was no surprise that Miami dominated the first 2 games. There were some great games from Jimmy, Hero, and Depot, and DeAndre Jordan couldn't come even close to filling Joel Embiid's shoes. It also didn't help that deadline acquisition James Harden was throwing up more concert dates. But Philly would be able to even the playing field in Game 3. Joel Embiid was back, and while he played alright, it would still be more than enough to blow the Heat out of the water. Jimmy Butler played well, scoring 33 points and grabbing 10 boards. It was just too bad that the rest of the team could only score 46. Jimmy could easily shoot over 50%, but the rest of the team couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. The same could almost be said for Game 4. They tried to keep it close, but the Sixers' shooting was just too good and Miami couldn't keep up. Jimmy Butler scored 40 points in this game, and it still resulted in a loss because Bam was his only teammate that decided to show up. The bench didn't produce much of anything, and I gotta talk about Kyle Lowry. He had been out with a hamstring injury up until Game 3 of this series, and he was horrible. In his first game back, he put up a massive 0 points, and he only scored 6 in Game 4. He only played in Games 3 and 4 of the series, as he was ruled out after aggravating his hamstring again. He probably wasn't fully recovered, so I guess I shouldn't be too shocked that a 36-year-old point guard playing with a hurt hamstring probably wasn't going to play the best. So now, we go from up 2-0 to tied just like that. Thankfully, Miami had a fantastic response in Game 5. 7 Heat players reached double figures, and the Heat demolished the 76ers 120-85. Jimmy had a good night, still leading the team in scoring, but he only scored 23. It showed that, while Miami could win some games when Jimmy Butler put them on his back, they were at their best whenever it wasn't a one-man show. At their best, when everyone showed up, the Heat looked like true contenders because the production could come from anyone. Game 6 would be a bit more competitive, but the result would still be the same as the previous one. Jimmy still scored 32 points, but his shooting wasn't as efficient as it had been before. But he would get some help this game, which ended up being the difference maker. Guys like PJ Tucker, Gabe Vincent, and Max Strus all hit big shots that would help Miami build a 19-point lead in the fourth quarter. and unlike many other games, they wouldn't forget how to play basketball down the stretch. The Heat left the city of brotherly love with a 9-point win, and they were on to their second conference finals appearance in 3 years. The play on the court was good, but what happened afterwards really got people talking. Heading to the locker room, Jimmy Butler could be heard saying,
"Tobias Harris over me?"
in reference to Philly's questionable choices in the 2019 offseason. He said afterward that he looked at this series the same as any other one, but I got a feeling that he wanted this one just a little more. In his eyes, the Sixers felt better about their futures with Harris and Ben Simmons, and many felt like him going to Miami wouldn't result in anything special. But now, they had just lost a series to the guy they chose to trade, and it looked like the Sixers' window was starting to shut. Ben Simmons was gone, Tobias Harris looked like a flop, and it seemed like no matter what they did, they could never get past the dreaded second round. But now they were on to the conference finals, where they would meet up with the Boston Celtics for the second time in 3 years. This was a team that started the year slow, but they eventually picked it up and won 51 games. The core was relatively the same, but they did make some additions, primarily Derek White and the second coming of Al Horford. Two guys who Heat fans would really grow to love in the future. Game 1 was like a roller coaster ride. Didn't start out great at all. The Heat offense started off slow, but picked up the pace to only trail by 3 after the first quarter. Still, the first half was just not great. Jason Tatum was hitting everything, and Jimmy Butler and Tyler Hero were the only reasons Miami wasn't down by a lot more. Trailing by 8, the Heat needed to flip the script, and thankfully that's what we got in the second half. Miami's defense was suffocating, and they were able to also thrive offensively. An 8-point deficit soon turned into a 17-point lead, and they were able to hold on to take Game 1. Jimmy Butler finished the game with 41 points, 9 rebounds, 4 steals, and 3 blocks, all while shooting over 60%. Gabe Vincent also had a nice game, hitting some big shots in the third to extend Miami's lead. So after a great team win in Game 1, would they be able to keep that up going into Game 2? No, just not even close. This game was over by halftime. Miami actually started the game off strong, quickly building a 10-point lead, but then it was gone just like that. Before anyone could get comfortable, Boston was up by 25, and the Heat never got close to making it competitive. This was a great overall effort for Boston. 5 players reached double figures, and 3 scored over 20. It was almost 4, but Grant Williams was off by just a point. The same could not be said for Miami. Jimmy Butler was still great, scoring 29 points on good shooting, but everyone else was just a non-factor. It was a rough game for sure, but it was nothing to panic about. They just needed to regroup and get that game back in Boston. Because like I said, when this team plays at their best, they could beat anyone that year. And that is exactly what we got in Game 3. Bam Adebayo, who'd been pretty quiet for a while, finally had another great game, putting up 31 points and 10 rebounds. His hot start helped the Heat jump out to a 26-point lead in the first half. It seemed like Miami was going to do what Boston did in Game 2, but since this was still the Miami Heat, it couldn't be that easy. I remember when I was watching this game, the first thing that popped into my head when they got up big was, how are they going to blow this one? Granted, I'm a very pessimistic sports fan, but the Heat give me plenty of reasons to believe that they would not be able to hold on to this lead. I already mentioned earlier that they just forget how to play basketball sometimes after getting a big lead. For God's sake, the lead was already down to 15 by halftime, and what made it even worse was that Jimmy left the game with a knee injury. It was all setting up to be a horrific Heat collapse, but they would hold firm in the third. The real fun came in the fourth quarter. With a little over 6 minutes left, Miami was up by 13. Shouldn't be too hard to close it out, right? Well, you already know what happens if I'm bringing this up. They scored no points for over 4 minutes, and Boston went on a 12-0 run. But then, out of nowhere, they flipped a switch and closed the game out. Max Strus and Bam hit some huge shots, the defense clutched up, and they avoided a horrific meltdown. Whenever one of my teams does something like this, it always leaves me feeling so conflicted. Like, yeah, I'm happy about the win, but why did you have to be so unnecessarily dramatic? I'm cool with a nice, easy win. Those don't take years off of my life, that's for sure. But with momentum on their side, the Heat once again had an opportunity to take full control of the series, and once again they laid an egg. Just like Game 2, this game was also over by halftime. For the first time all postseason, Jimmy Butler had a really bad game. Scoring 6 points while putting up a concert date is not going to win you a game in the playoffs, and the offense as a whole was awful. Nobody in the starting lineup even reached double figures. Lowry, Tucker, and Strus were a combined 1 for 17 from the field. Disgusting. Game 5 was even worse because Miami actually had a lead despite their offense being terrible again. The score was 42-37 at halftime, and this, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call prison ball. Too bad for the Heat that Boston's sentence was over after halftime. While they got their shit together and actually started hitting some shots, the Heat couldn't score on a $2 hooker. When it was all said and done, the Celtics won by 13, and it was now do or die for Miami. A lot of the blame for this loss has to go Jimmy Butler's way. Unlike Game 4, the Heat were in this one for a while. If he had played up to his standards, or at least close to that, then Miami could have been the ones up 3-2. But instead, he put up another concert date, and the Heat were at death's door. Granted, it was clear that his injuries were still affecting him, but if that was the case, then Spo should have tried to adjust the game plan. If they didn't figure things out quick, then it would be another lost year. But luckily for them, they were facing some familiar circumstances. Down 3-2 in the conference finals against the Celtics in TD Garden. Now where have we seen that one before? Almost 10 years after LeBron's iconic Game 6 performance, we once again witnessed one of the greatest games in franchise history. Like LeBron, Jimmy Butler looked like he was on a mission. He was able to get buckets while also getting some of his teammates involved. He was able to easily score with some great fadeaways, finishing at the rim, and he even hit 4 threes. Unlike LeBron's game though, this game didn't turn into a blowout. There were times that Miami could have pulled away, but they let Boston hang around. They were even down late in the fourth quarter, but Kyle Lowry hit a contested 3 to tie the game up. This was one of his few good scoring games in the playoffs, so better late than never, I guess. Jimmy would seal the game with under a minute to go, hitting a crazy fadeaway J in Derek White's face. Miami won the game 111-103, and we're going back home for Game 7. Jimmy Butler finished with 47 points, 9 rebounds, 8 assists, and 4 steals. This was his 4th 40-point game of the playoffs. He also showed that he could start and finish a game strong, scoring 14 points in the first and 17 points in the fourth. It seemed like we really could get a repeat of 2012 after this performance. It looked like it was destined to happen, but we couldn't celebrate unless they took care of business in Game 7. So tell me if you've heard this one before. The Heat had a really slow start. Jimmy and Bam were good, but nobody else in the starting lineup even hit a field goal. Take Jimmy and Bam out, and the rest of the team only shot 1 for 9 in the first, and the result was a 15-point Boston lead. They would start to chip away though. Jimmy and Bam scored the Heat's first 17 points of the quarter. Butler himself would score 18 in the second, and the lead had been trimmed to 6 going into halftime. They showed that this was a winnable game. Our stars were playing well, it was just on the depth to catch up. It looked like a Max Strus 3 got the Celtics lead down to 2, but replay review took the 3 away. This was about as close as you could get to going out, and it's still disputed to this day if Strus's foot actually went out. And trust me, that will be important for the end result. But as the game went on, the Celtics lead continued to grow. Jimmy or Bam would score, then the Celtics would respond with even more points. The Celtics stars were showing up, and they were getting decent contributions from the supporting cast. Entering the fourth quarter, the Heat trailed by 7. Like the last quarter, a couple of scores by Jimmy and Bam cut it to a 1-possession game, but the offense began to stall out, resulting in a Boston run. Down 13 with around 3 minutes to go, the game seemed all but over. But out of nowhere, these guys decided that now was the time to show up. They were also lucky that Marcus Smart was building a brick house in the clutch. Lowry gets a layup. A Smart miss leads to a Strus putback dunk. The teams exchange misses, but a Lowry steal ends with Oladipo finishing at the rim. The lead was cut in half, but there was less than 90 seconds to go. Another Smart miss gave Miami another quick bucket. Instead of using clock on the next possession, Jaylen Brown drove on Bam, resulting in an offensive foul. Then Max Strus, who was only 1 for 6 from deep this game, hits a moving contested 3 to make it a 2-point game. The momentum had flipped almost instantly. It looked like Miami could actually pull this off and seal the finals bid that Boston looked to have locked up. This feeling intensified after Smart couldn't get past Bam and Jimmy got the rebound. He takes the ball up the floor, sees that he has some space, and pulls up for the go-ahead shot. At the time, it's safe to say that everyone watching thought this shot was going in. It looked perfect. The way Miami had been playing, it felt like something that was scripted. Even watching it back now, there's still part of me that thinks this shot is going to drop. But no. It clanks off the front of the rim, Boston gets the rebound and seals the game at the line. It was like the air had been sucked out of the building after Jimmy missed. Instead of snatching the win and finals berth in dramatic fashion, we had to watch as our biggest rival celebrated on our home court. It was all heartbreaking. Watching at home, I just felt drained and sad. It was a great season that ended in devastating fashion. Despite the late miss, Butler and Bam had great games. They combined for 60 points and were the only reason that Miami didn't get rain off the court. Depth seemed to be the name of the game for this series. While he did have some bad games in the middle, Jimmy still had a great series, averaging around 26 points with 2 steals, and for the entire playoffs, he averaged over 27 points, 7 rebounds, and 2 steals, all while shooting over 50% from the field. but he was the only one that I could really say was good in this series. While Bam did have a couple good games, there were also times where he was a complete non-factor on the offensive end. Nobody else on Miami even averaged 10 points per game. I said before that at their best, this team could have beaten anyone, but we never really saw this team's best in this series. Most of the time they started off way too slow, and the only reason they didn't get beaten sooner was because of Jimmy Butler. Thinking about it now, I don't know why the rotation was so small in Game 7. I know that teams reduced their rotation size for the playoffs, but something needed to be done about the offense in this game. Duncan Robinson and Caleb Martin, two guys who could have given the offense a spark, got no minutes this game. The roster was already depleted since Tyler Hero had been out for basically the last 3 games. As good as Depot was defensively, playing him for 33 minutes still hurt the team offensively. The guard production this game was almost non-existent until the final 3 minutes, yet we let a great 3-point shooter just ride the pine for the biggest game of the year. After the game, Jimmy Butler let everyone know that Miami would be in the same spot next year with enough to get the job done. I wanted to believe him, but that all depended on what the front office was willing to do. The Celtics would go on to lose in the finals to Golden State. I guess it was cool to see the result I wanted in the hate watch, but it still didn't mean much. I would have much rather seen my team lose in the finals than Boston. The 2022 offseason got off to an interesting start. Both Kevin Durant and Donovan Mitchell looked to be on the trading block. This sounds great for Miami, especially since both guys have been linked to Miami before. But if you know anything about the Heat, you also know they wouldn't end up getting either guy. Part of this I blame on Pat Riley, and I also blame a bigger part of this on the Rudy Gobert trade. Minnesota got Rudy Gobert in exchange for 5 first-round picks and 4 players. For as good of a defensive player as Gobert is, this was still a massive overpayment, and it ruined the trade market. Teams were thinking, wow, if Utah got 5 firsts for Rudy Gobert, then Kevin Durant should be worth even more. I remember that there were some reports that Utah was asking for 8 first-round picks for Mitchell. That is asinine. There are maybe a handful of players in NBA history who are worth 2 generations of college players, and Mitchell was certainly not one of them. Pat Riley also tended to make a lot of players untouchable, even if the talent they could acquire was better at the time. Now I think the Nets wanted Bam for KD. On paper that sounds good, but I don't know if the Heat could afford to lose their only good big man, so I don't blame them for eventually pulling out of negotiations. Durant wouldn't end up being dealt until the 2023 trade deadline, so it wasn't a huge miss. What I can fully blame Pat for was not even making an offer to Utah for Donovan Mitchell. Yes, the draft demands were ridiculous, but he could have at least tried to offer more players instead. Whenever these hypothetical trades were made, Tyler Hero was always the centerpiece, beginning a long stretch of time where this dude was in every single Heat trade scenario. Mitchell would end up being sent to Cleveland for Colin Sexton, Lauri Markkanen, Ochai Agbaji, and 5 first-round picks. Utah ended up getting a really good haul for Mitchell, but man, I was still really pissed when I saw this. Mitchell would have been great in Miami, especially since him and Bam were good friends, and that would have given the Heat a real star at shooting guard. So what did Miami actually do during the offseason? Well, they lost PJ Tucker. Not ideal, but I also don't blame them for not wanting to pay a 37-year-old journeyman $11 million per year. I love PJ in Miami, but that price tag was a little too much, and his immediate decline in Philly showed that the Heat may have made the right call. They drafted Serbian forward Nikola Jovic in the first round, re-signed a couple guys, signed some undrafted players to 2-way contracts, and that was it. Despite the issues that got the team knocked out in the previous year, they decided just to run it back after some half-assed attempts to bring in another star. This was a prime example of Pat Riley's whale hunting. Whenever there would be a big star on the market, you would always hear about how that player is linked to Miami. Nothing would happen, everyone worth a damn is gone, and we're left with the scraps as a result. I just didn't buy that a team with Jimmy, Bam, Hero, and a bunch of undrafted players could win a championship. At least the bubble team had guys like Jay Crowder and Goran Dragic, guys who had either proven to be a good role player or played at an all-star level. It just felt like we needed more, but ended up with nothing, which was extremely disappointing. The most notable part about this offseason was franchise legend Udonis Haslem announcing that he would retire after the 2023 season. Granted, Haslem hadn't been a regular part of the rotation in about 8 years by this point, but it still sucked to see that he was about to be done. The 20-year vet had become more of a player coach in recent years. He was a great leader and someone who could get the guys fired up at any time. He had also remained a fan favorite despite never receiving regular time on the floor for almost a decade now, showing how much he truly meant to the team, city, and fans. He had been around for the greatest moments in franchise history, and his name was synonymous with Heat culture. After all, he was the original Heat undrafted project player. The 2023 season started about as well as I thought it would. The team wasn't horrible, but they weren't good either. They started off 7-11, and like 2021, they wouldn't lose too many games in a row, but they also wouldn't win many games in a row. They were the definition of mediocrity. It seemed like hardly anyone was improving. They had either plateaued or even declined. Bam Adebayo was the only one who actually improved. He was Miami's best player throughout the regular season, resulting in a second All-Star nod and a fourth selection to the NBA All-Defensive Team. So the Heat were all right until Bam went off the floor. Ever since Bam became the starting center in 2019, the Heat could never find him a quality backup, and this year was no different. Bam's backup for the last couple seasons was Dwayne Dedmon, who hadn't been terrible before, but this year, not only did his play decline, but he was hated by the fan base. Two incidents come to mind when I think of what led to his exit from South Beach. The first came in a close loss to the Lakers. Keep in mind that this dude was already on thin ice because his play had taken a nosedive after a pretty damn good November. The Heat were losing to the Lakers' backups, and Dedmon got a rebound. Instead of passing the ball to Kyle Lowry, who was calling for the ball, this dude turns around and complains to the ref. So, while he's not looking, JTA steals the ball and dishes it to Thomas Bryant, who gets fouled. This was already a bad look, but it in fact does get worse. The nail in his coffin would come in a close home win against the Thunder. The game was going on just fine in the second quarter until we see a massage gun come flying onto the court. Turns out, Dedmon got pissed about getting subbed out. After a back and forth with the coaches, he hit a chair on his way to the locker room, launching the massage gun. He would get suspended for this and would only play one more game in Miami before getting traded to San Antonio. Another issue the team had besides an over-reliance on undrafted players and questionable backup big men, they did not have a true power forward on the roster. Unless you want to count Udonis Haslem, which as much as I love him, he was not the answer for our power forward problems in 2023. Rookie Nikola Jovic could have filled that role, but he was way too raw, and he spent most of the year in the G League. So, because we had no true power forward, Spo was forced to start Caleb Martin, with Haywood Highsmith backing him up. Both of these guys were around 6'5", so they weren't really built for interior defense or rebounding. This put more stress on Bam, who was our only good big man on the roster. With Bam consistently being our tallest player on the court, that made Miami struggle immensely with getting rebounds. Now Bam is 6'9", so he ain't looking up at too many people, but when he has to go up against other good bigs like Jokic and Embiid, guys who are both bigger both in weight and height, that creates a lot of problems. Jimmy was still playing well, even if it wasn't at the level that we saw in the 2022 playoffs. He was still able to put up over 20 a night while locking it down on defense, and he had some nice moments throughout the year. It would have been nice to see some more games like we saw in the playoffs, but I guess to him it may have not been worth putting his body through that much stress during the regular season, especially since he dealt with injuries every now and then. Tyler Hero was a very strange case. He hadn't gotten significantly worse, but I can't say that he was better than he was during his 6th Man of the Year campaign. He was back in the starting lineup after Spo pulled Duncan Robinson out of the rotation, and I think that is why his flaws became more apparent. Instead of being a nice spark off the bench, he became a starter who was an inefficient scorer and a defensive liability. If he wasn't scoring, then he really couldn't do anything else, which is tough whenever the team's success largely depends on you developing as an all-around player. The Heat were 30-25 at the deadline, and it was clear to anyone with eyes that something needed to be done. They were mentioned in some hypothetical trades like they always were. Would they finally land PJ Washington? Would they land KD after doing nothing in the summer? Nope. Besides shipping Dedmon out for nothing, they made no trades. Instead, they chose to shop in the buyout market. And who would they find in the bargain bin? Kevin Love and Cody Zeller, a past his prime star and a guy who wasn't even in the league before signing with Miami. The reception to these moves was understandably negative. Like, really, Pat? Your team is struggling because of a lack of size and offensive production, and your answer is Kevin Love and Cody Zeller? It's laughable to think that this was supposed to be a championship team. Kevin Love was technically an upgrade since he was an actual power forward, and he did fit in with that good old Heat culture. Zeller was just a tall body to put on the floor for like 15 minutes. He had his moments, but there was still a lot to be desired from our backup center. The rest of the regular season was more of the same. They stayed around 3 to 5 games above 500 for the rest of the year, at least until the final game. This is the only one really worth talking about, because it was Udonis Haslem's retirement game. This was a nice feel-good game. Bam surprised him with a rocking chair before the game, he got some video messages from former Heat players, and D-Wade was courtside in a UD jersey. Unlike Wade, Haslem wasn't afraid to shoot the ball in his last game. He was hitting some middies, finishing at the rim, hitting some threes, and he even caught a lob from Duncan Robinson. That had to have been like his first lob in a decade. The Heat were able to beat the Magic by 13, finishing the year with a 44-38 record. Haslem finished with 24 points, which tied him with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for the most points in a game by a 42-year-old. Udonis Haslem and Kareem, absolutely elite company right there. With their 44-38 record, Miami finished with the 7th best record in the Eastern Conference, meaning that for the first time they would have to play in the NBA play-in tournament. Their opponent would be the 8th seeded Hawks. The winner would capture the 7th seed and play Boston. The loser would play the winner of Chicago and Toronto for the 8th seed. Going into this game, I wasn't too worried. The Hawks were even more mediocre than the Heat, so there wasn't much reason to think that they couldn't get the job done. And then they played the game. Man, this was rough. The Hawks bench was cooking, and the Heat could not come close to matching their production. The game was close for a while, but the lead soon ballooned to 24 points in the second quarter. The guy that was keeping us in this game was Kyle Lowry of all people. He had some good finishes and was knocking down some big threes. They were able to trim the lead down to 6 multiple times, but they could never catch all the way up. A big reason for that was because the team could not get a rebound. Remember the rebounding issue I mentioned earlier? Well, that problem was front and center in this game. The Heat were out-rebounded 63-29. Atlanta had almost as many offensive rebounds as Miami had total rebounds. This killed them late in the game, giving up back-breaking second-chance points. With this loss, it would be win or go home against the Bulls. Before this game was played, I remember there being serious discussions among Heat fans about what they wanted. Did we want to make the playoffs and get wrecked by the 1 seed, or would it be better to lose and get the lottery pick? I'm not gonna lie, I was so done with this team that I honestly preferred getting a better draft pick. It seemed more beneficial to maybe get something good at pick 14 than making the playoffs and probably getting swept. Now the Heat did start off a lot better against Chicago. Max Strus was a man possessed. He more than quadrupled his points from last game in the first quarter alone. He and Jimmy combined for 23 of Miami's 29 first quarter points. They were able to jump out to a 14-point lead because of this hot start, but like most Heat games from this year, they would cool off in a hurry, allowing Chicago to get back in the game. Miami would do enough to keep the Bulls at bay for a while, but their offensive struggles would eventually catch up to them. Thanks to DeMar DeRozan and Andre Drummond, Chicago would go back ahead by 6 with around 8 minutes left in the game. Now a 6-point lead with this much time to go doesn't sound terrible, but it felt like 60 with how horrible this offense looked. But, to the detriment of some Heat fans, this team refused to die. Clutch shots by Jimmy and Strus, along with some great defense, allowed the Heat to come away with the victory and the 8th seed. When I was watching this game live, I remember saying after the game, "Yeah, we just earned the right to lose by 50 to Milwaukee for 4 games. Man, if only I knew what these guys had in store for us." Going into the series against the Bucks, there was no reason to believe that Miami had any real chance of winning. Milwaukee finished the year with a 58-24 record, not only the best record in the East, but the best record in the entire NBA. They were a pretty deep team, with the same core from the 2021 title run, mixed with some more good role players. They also played most of the year without star guard Chris Middleton, who had been back for a while now. The consensus was that Miami could maybe get 1 to 2 games, but none of the experts believed that they had any real chance of winning the series. And why would they? An 8 seed had only beaten a 1 seed 5 times before, and only 3 times in a 7-game series. Game 1 would unknowingly set the tone for how the rest of the series would go. They would start off hot, and they were able to keep that hot shooting going throughout the rest of the game. Jimmy played a great game, consistently finishing at the rim and hitting some middies as well. Bam also looked great, scoring 22 points and hitting numerous shots to keep Milwaukee at arm's length. What really surprised me was the 3-point shooting. As a team, the Heat shot 15 for 25 from deep. Kevin Love and Gabe Vincent were the standout players in this regard, combining for 33 points on extremely efficient splits. Not to mention that they did this all after losing Tyler Hero in the first half. But even with this great performance, there still wasn't much reason to believe that they could win this series. We've seen teams get hot before and seal a game, only to fall back down to earth and get smoked. It wasn't like the Bucks had a bad shooting night either. They still shot almost 50% from the field, they just couldn't hit a 3, and they still put up 117 points without having Giannis for most of the game. If they could hit their 3s, then they would be fine, and that's exactly what happened in Game 2. Without Giannis, the Bucks put on a clinic, hitting 25 3-pointers, and the game was over by the third quarter. Hell, it was over by halftime. Miami still wasn't terrible offensively, but Milwaukee's offensive barrage was just too much to deal with. After this, I remember feeling like we had reached our peak, but I wasn't sad about it. Hell, at least we weren't going to get swept. I was just hoping that it would be competitive for the rest of the series. Game 3 would be another blowout, but Miami would be on the right side of things this time. After a back and forth start to the first quarter, the Heat proceeded to go on a 19-0 run, and they never looked back. This run was primarily led by Jimmy Butler. He scored 17 of his 30 points in the first quarter. There were solid performances all around, but my player of the game would have to be Duncan Robinson. He finished with 20 points and hit 5 threes. It was impressive that he was looking this good after not being a regular part of the rotation for basically the entire season. Tyler Hero's injury gave Robinson an opportunity that he took no time seizing. So overall, a great home win for the Heat to give them momentum and the series lead back. But but despite all this, they did not leave unscathed. With the game all but over, Victor Oladipo drove to the rim, and when he came down, he immediately clenched his left knee. You could tell by his and his teammates' reactions that this was serious. Sure enough, it was. It was later shown that Oladipo had torn the patellar tendon in his left knee, taking him out for the rest of the playoffs. This would not only be his last game in Miami, but the last game of his entire career, showing that this guy had no luck when it came to staying healthy. It was rough to see Depot go out like this. I was really excited when the Heat brought him in, but he was never able to get back to his all-star form. The injuries ended up dealing him in, and now the Heat would be without another guard in their quest for ring number 4, making the mountain even more difficult to climb. Game 4 seemed like things would start to get back to normal. Not only did Miami lose Victor Oladipo in Game 3, but Giannis was also coming back. I had some hope that maybe they could catch fire and pull this one out, but I wasn't going to be disappointed if reality set in. But you all probably know what goes down in this game. This is the game. Whenever people talk about Jimmy Butler in Miami, this is the first game that comes to mind. He was a man on a mission from the opening tip. 3 guys scored for Miami in the first quarter. Kevin Love had 3, Gabe Vincent had 3, Jimmy Butler had 22 points on 9 for 10 shooting. The dude was on pace to score 80 points. Now he did cool down a bit in the second, only scoring 2 points, but the rest of the team did enough to make the deficit manageable going into halftime. The third quarter wouldn't be as pretty. Jimmy and Bam were the only ones that could do anything offensively, and the Bucks were able to take advantage. A Grayson Allen 3 put Milwaukee up by 14 to start the fourth quarter, and unless someone was able to jumpstart this offense, it was all but over. But before we get into the big stuff, I want to quickly shout out Caleb Martin for his fourth quarter performance. 10 points on 3 shots with a couple of clutch moments would be huge for anyone. Too bad for him that someone else decided to go even bigger. After 2 okay quarters, Jimmy Butler was back. He scored 21 points in the fourth quarter. What made this even crazier was that he didn't get his first bucket until there was around 7 minutes left. It was like he flipped a switch and everything started to go down. There were plenty of nice shots and finishes, but nothing comes close to his long transition too late in the quarter. The energy in the arena, the call by Kevin Harlan, and Jimmy letting everyone know this was his shit made this moment perfect. It's one of those shots that I have to watch anytime it pops up on Twitter, because everything from that moment comes right back to me whenever I see this clip. The Heat held on to win 119-114, and Jimmy Butler finished with 56 points. This is the highest scoring playoff game in franchise history, and the 4th highest scoring playoff game in NBA history. It is, without a doubt, one of the greatest playoff performances ever, and like I mentioned before, it is the game that people think of when they think about Jimmy and Miami. So back to Milwaukee they went, up 3-1, with a chance to become just the 6th ever 8 seed to beat a 1 seed in the playoffs. Strangely enough, this game wasn't on ESPN or TNT. This game was on NBA TV, which I understand that these games are planned out ahead of time, but it's still funny to think that a game this big wasn't on either of the major networks. Plus, I think that many believe that Milwaukee could at least get this one. Backs against the wall at home after how they lost Game 4, there was no way they were going to collapse and let Jimmy torch them again, right? Well, I've got good news for Milwaukee. It wasn't just Jimmy hitting all the big shots this time. Like the previous game, Jimmy started out white hot and the game was close. But like we had seen before, the wheels would start to fall off for the Heat. A 22-5 third quarter run gave the Bucks a 16-point lead going into the fourth quarter. Seemed like a done deal, we would just have to get the job done in Game 6. But dread it, run from it, destiny arrives all the same. The shots started falling for Miami, while Milwaukee started to build a brick house. Jimmy was back on, and before anyone knew what was going on, it was a tie game. But despite these efforts, the Bucks were still in great shape to win this one. Up by 4 with 13 seconds left, they needed one stop and the game was over. Then Gabe Vincent hit a quick 3. Then Giannis almost turns the ball over, twice. Holiday splits a pair of free throws, and Jimmy is somehow able to catch an inbound lob from Gabe Vincent and finish with one hand to force overtime. I swear for Bucks fans, this must have been pure, unadulterated nightmare fuel. In overtime, Miami was able to do just enough to secure the win and the series, making them only the 3rd 8th seed in NBA history to beat a 1 seed in a 7-game series. This also made them the first play-in team to win a playoff series. If you couldn't tell already, Jimmy Butler was the best player in the series by a country mile. He averaged almost 38 points per game, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals, while shooting almost 60% from the field. This was, without exaggeration, one of the greatest individual playoff series performances ever. He was able to put the team on his back when needed, and he took down the best team in the NBA in 5 games. Something that I don't think is brought up enough regarding this series is how Miami's offense and three-point shooting skyrocketed. During the regular season, the Heat shot around 34% from 3, which is almost dead last. They were also dead last in points per game with 109. In this 5-game series, they shot 45% from 3 and averaged 124 points per game. And while Jimmy did a lot of the work, guys like Bam, Gabe Vincent, Kevin Love, Duncan Robinson, and even Kyle Lowry had their moments. Now there are some that believe that the Bucks would have won this series if they had a healthy Giannis for the whole series, but I don't really think so. Miami's shooting was just too good, and their defense on Jimmy never changed. They would sometimes switch who was guarding him, but they never bothered to try to double him and make someone else beat them. Giannis also played in both games that saw Milwaukee blow a 15-point lead. Regardless of any hypotheticals, what was done, and the Heat were on to the second round. When we won this series, I told myself that it really didn't matter what happened in the second round. It was just cool to be there. But those feelings quickly faded away when I saw that we were playing the Knicks. They had just beaten the Cavs in 5 games, winning their first playoff series since 2013. Now with the Bucks out, they looked primed to make their first conference finals appearance in 23 years. This team was good, being led by newcomer Jalen Brunson, Julius Randle sometimes, and a young RJ Barrett. I think many still believe that the Knicks could win, just because it would be hard for Miami to repeat their offensive output from the previous series. Now this series was not nearly as eventful as the Bucks series, despite going one more game. The Heat offense wasn't nearly as effective, only scoring 104 points per game, and their 3-point percentage went down to around 30%. Luckily for them, the Knicks didn't have nearly as much firepower as Milwaukee. Besides Jalen Brunson, the Knicks didn't have another source of consistent and efficient offense. On Miami's end, some guys stepped up their games while others fell back down to earth. Jimmy was a bit slower in this series for a reason that we'll get into later. He was still good, but we never really saw a Jimmy Butler. Like I said, this wasn't a super eventful series. There was no real threat of them coming back after the Heat went up 3-1. So instead of going over each game at great length, I'm going to talk about these games in more of a rapid-fire style. Game 1. Despite being down double digits early, the Heat are led by Jimmy and Kyle Lowry and win by 7. They don't leave the game unscathed, as Jimmy suffered an ankle injury, sidelining him for the next game. Game 2. With the returning Julius Randle and absent Jimmy Butler, the Knicks use a nice game from Brunson and a late run to even the series. Game 3. The only fight the Knicks could show was against Cody Zeller. Jimmy, Bam, and Strus were hooping, and Miami took the series lead back. Game 4. This was a much more competitive game, but death was the name of the game in this case. Despite a few scares in the fourth, the Heat hold on to get an 8-point win and the 3-1 series lead. Game 5. This time the Heat blow a double-digit lead. With a combined 88 points from Brunson, Barrett, and Randle, the Knicks were able to keep their season alive, sending it back to South Beach. Game 6. Brunson and Randle give the Knicks a 14-point first-quarter lead, but the Heat were able to battle back thanks to a big quarter from Bam. Jalen Brunson was a walking bucket, but a late turnover would seal the game. Miami won in 6 and became the second ever 8th seed to reach the conference finals. Funnily enough, the only other team to do this was the 1999 New York Knicks. And who did that team beat to start this crazy run? The Miami Heat. Weird how things worked out like that. I know that last series wasn't super eventful, but don't worry, because it's about to pick up again. After dominating Philly in Game 7, Boston advanced to the conference finals, making this the third postseason meeting between the Heat and Celtics in the last 4 seasons. This Celtics team was even better than last year. The core was still the same, but much improved. They were career years for Tatum and Brown, and they still had plenty of good role players. They even traded for Malcolm Brogdon, who would later be named the 6th man of the year. They also added Blake Griffin. I know it didn't matter much, I just wanted to point this out because it was so weird. Also some foreshadowing for my Lob City video. This team only finished 1 game behind the Bucks in the standings, so it was clear that they were heavy championship favorites. This was obvious from the get-go, when ESPN gave them a 97% chance to win this series. Now I totally understand them being heavy favorites, but only giving this Heat team a 3% chance to win after how they had been playing was still crazy. Now granted, as much as I loved how this was going, I didn't have high hopes for this series. I'm sure others did, but I'm a very pessimistic sports fan, so I was more anxious than excited for this. Game 1 showed that they were still capable of keeping up with the best teams. Through the first 2 quarters, it was a close game, but the offense was starting to slow down, leading to Boston building a double-digit lead. Little did they know this is exactly where Miami wanted them. Once they were down 12, everything started to fall. They turned a 12-point deficit into a 12-point lead when the quarter was over, thanks to great efforts by Jimmy, Bam, and Strus. They outscored the Celtics by 21 points in the third quarter. It was crazy seeing how well this team was playing when they were down by double digits. Like, it really made you wonder, where the hell was this team during the regular season, and why could they never start off this hot? Of course, This team starts to struggle again immediately after getting a good lead. The Celtics were able to get the lead back down to 5, but who else but Jimmy Butler would help Miami take this game? He was able to take over, hitting some nice middies to keep the Celtics at bay. The dagger would come with around a minute to go, when he hit a 3 to put the Heat up by 10. I'll never forget that call by Kevin Harlan, who shouted, "Jimmy freaking Butler puts it in!" There's a reason that dude is one of the all-time greats. Game 2 was even more eventful. Despite a nice Heat start, the Celtics would start to hit their threes, once again giving them a double-digit lead. But who would lead them back this time? Not Jimmy, not Bam, Caleb Martin. He was another undrafted player that would get talked about when discussing Miami's player development. He had been a decent starter both in the regular season and playoffs, but he was on a different level in this series. He scored 15 points in Game 1, and he scored 12 points in the second quarter of Game 2, helping Miami go into the half up by 4. But once again, Jason Tatum and the Celtics went on a big run, and before he could blink, Boston was back up by 11. It was crazy how quickly the momentum could flip in these games, and we weren't even at the best part yet. Things carried on without much change until the 6-minute mark, when Grant Williams hit a 3 to put Boston up by 9. On his way down the floor, he said something to Jimmy Butler, which made him reply with just a smirk. Up to this point, I wasn't super familiar with Williams. I had only really known him for missing 2 free throws against the Cavs after telling Donovan Mitchell that he would make both. Now he had made another premature mistake, unknowingly poking the bear. The very next possession, Jimmy drove on Williams, getting an and one with a nice finish. The two immediately went nose to nose, but it wouldn't end there. Jimmy would score on Williams again, cutting the lead to 4. He tied the game with a one-handed midi, and he gave the Heat the lead after hitting a contested jumper in the corner. He scored all 9 of his fourth quarter points in these 6 minutes, on Grant Williams. It was the textbook definition of fuck around and find out. Not surprisingly, Williams was soon taken out of the game, and a Gabe Vincent jumper helped close the game out. The Heat had stolen both games on the road, coming back from double-digit deficits 3 times in the process. I swear I saw a stat that said the Heat had a 70% win percentage when they trailed by double digits, which is insane. It was the complete opposite of what we'd seen during the regular season, or even last year's playoffs. So going into Game 3, you would expect the Celtics to come out with a fire under them after how they lost their home games. This would be the time that they would take the momentum back and get back into the series. Nah, this game was belt to ass. The game got ugly, real quick. There was a point where Miami's undrafted players had more points than Boston's entire roster. This is what I was talking about when I mentioned how good they could be if they started hot. Everything was going down. They were running plays for Cody Zeller, for God's sake. It was surreal to watch. It really started to sink in that this team was going to the finals. It was only a matter of time now. Of course, like I'd mentioned before, I am a very pessimistic fan. I'm always thinking of the worst outcome whenever something like this happens. One of my friends texted me at halftime congratulating me for my team making the finals. I said, just chill now because it's not over yet. They still got to win one more game. Oh, if only I knew how right I was. The celebration would be put on hold in Game 4. This game was defined by 2 big second half runs for the Celtics. An 18-0 third quarter run quickly erased a 9-point Heat lead, and a 12-0 run in the fourth quarter all but put the game away. Jason Tatum stepped up in a big way, and Boston also got some good performances from Derek White and Grant Williams. Miami looked like the team we had witnessed in the regular season. Jimmy wasn't efficient, Bam disappeared, and Caleb Martin was the only role player that showed up. It should be noted that Jaylen Brown told Miami to not let them get one before this game started. Boy, would those words come back to bite us in more ways than one. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. By this time, the Nuggets had already cashed their ticket to the finals by sweeping the Lakers. So now all the attention was on the Heat trying to finish the job. Back in Boston for Game 5, it was now the Celtics' turn to give the belt to ass. This game was over after the first quarter. In a cruel twist of fate, we were now seeing Jimmy fail to show up, and the role players had to carry the brunt of the offense. You can imagine how well this went. Boston's bench only scored 15 points, but that doesn't matter when 4 of your 5 starters score over 20 points. It was a very top-heavy game, but it was enough to get the job done because of how well they shot the ball. At this point, the dread was really starting to sink in. It seemed like they could actually blow this. Boston had started to figure it out, while Miami's offense had gone cold at the worst time. If they couldn't take care of business in Game 6 at home, then there was a real chance of Boston making history. This was must win. I wish someone would have told the Heat that before they went out there. Their offense had not gotten any better since their last couple of pathetic showings. They were playing some good old-fashioned prison ball, with Caleb Martin being one of the only reasons they were still in the game. Lucky for them, Boston was also willing to play some prison ball. Their best players also couldn't take the lid off the rim, but the Heat still couldn't catch up. They found themselves down by 13 in the third quarter, but the power of friendship wouldn't let them go down so easily. The shots finally started to fall, and a Duncan Robinson layup got the Heat back on top. The offense would immediately go cold after this moment, and it once again felt like they couldn't catch up. It felt like the game was still winnable. Anyone just needed to step up and take it. Thankfully for Miami, Jimmy Butler finally decided to show up. Up to this point, he had been quite terrible, not just in this game, but ever since Game 4. But everything was starting to go their way in these final 2 minutes. Butler was on, and his recent struggles could be forgotten if Miami was able to pull this one out. It looked like they could after Duncan Robinson got a great look, but that attempt was too strong. But they still had life. Marcus Smart split a pair of free throws, meaning that one shot could send the Heat to the finals. My heart rate was skyrocketing, and it only got worse when Jimmy Butler got fouled on a three-pointer with 3 seconds to go. Everything was on the line here at the stripe. But like many times before, Jimmy Butler came through in the clutch, giving the Heat a 1-point lead with 3 seconds to go. One stop would send us to the finals with all the momentum on our side. I was ready to go crazy. One stop. That's all it would take. Marcus Smart took a contested 3, it rimmed out, and then Derek White put it back in. In real time, it looked like it didn't get off in time, but sure enough, he got it off with 0.1 seconds left. Just brutal, gut-wrenching stuff. Looking at the replay, nobody was guarding White after he inbounded the ball. That should have been Max Strus, but he was focused on denying Tatum. Nobody was even in the paint to get a rebound. If White didn't get it, then Tatum could have also been in the spot to put it back. Despite their efforts near the end, they had lost again. After being up 3-0, they would have to go back to Boston for Game 7. This moment is one of the only sports moments that I could think of that legitimately left me traumatized. The pit that I felt in my stomach after watching the replay was incomparable to anything else that I felt when watching my teams. It was a stunned silence that covered up so much sadness and anger. I knew it was bad when all of these feelings carried over to the next day, since I normally get over this kind of stuff pretty quickly. But I had slowly come to the realization that my team was about to be the first team in NBA history to blow a 3-0 lead to Boston with a trip to the finals on the line. Even today, I hate watching this shot because it partially brings back all the feelings from that night. So, my presumed Miami Heat fandom funeral would take place on Memorial Day 2023 in TD Garden. The 2 best words in sports, unless you're a fan of either team playing. Game 7. There were reports that the Heat scheduled a flight to Denver before they played this game, which is pretty ballsy for a team that looked to be at death's door. This game started about as slow as the others did, but once again, the Celtics were willing to play some prison ball. There was a combined 17 points scored with under 5 to play in the first. But Miami settled down. A Max Strus jumper would put them up by 2, and from that point on, Boston never got the lead back. Suddenly, the Heat's role players were showing up, none more so than Caleb Martin. Throughout this series, he had been Miami's most consistent player, and he had his best game here in Boston. 26 points and 10 rebounds, while hitting 4 shots from deep. He looked like a star in this game, hitting multiple big threes and fadeaway J's. This game alone made me buy a Caleb Martin jersey. Jimmy Butler had a quiet 28 points. They weren't on great splits, but he would get a bucket when he needed to. Gabe Vincent, Kyle Lowry, and Duncan Robinson all had their moments, and the Miami Heat were able to avoid a historic collapse with a 19-point Game 7 victory. I think it's important to mention that Jason Tatum injured his ankle at the beginning of the game. He still played the entire game, but that definitely impacted what he could do in this game. However, that was no excuse for the rest of the team to not show up. Jaylen Brown in particular was horrible. He turned the ball over 8 times, and he didn't even crack 20 points on 23 shots. He didn't have a great series, and this game was the culmination of all of his struggles. With this win, the Miami Heat became the second 8th seed in NBA history to make the NBA Finals. Jimmy Butler was named MVP of the conference finals, although Caleb Martin almost won it, with the vote being 5-4 in favor of Butler. After losing Game 7 at home to Boston the previous year, Butler stated that the Heat would have enough to get the job done next time. 1 year later, despite their struggles, he was proven right. The power of friendship was enough to make the NBA Finals, but would it be enough to win a championship? Miami's final opponent would be the number 1 team in the West, the Denver Nuggets. They were led by 2-time MVP Nikola Jokic. The supporting cast was perfectly put together. They still had Jamal Murray, who could easily get buckets. Aaron Gordon provided some inside scoring while also being able to hit a couple threes. Michael Porter Jr. could be dangerous when he got hot. They also picked up KCP, Reggie Jackson, and Bruce Brown in the offseason. Denver had a bit of an easy road to the finals, but I'm not going to fault them because they just played whoever was in front of them. They played an 8 seed, 4 seed, and a 7 seed. Meanwhile, Miami had to run the damn gauntlet to get to this point. This matchup was interesting to say the least. While I didn't think Miami could win the championship, I was just happy that they were in this spot. Not to mention that they were going to be in front of a live crowd this time around. You had one team playing for the first championship in franchise history, and another team looking to be the first 8th seed to win a title. I remember people mentioning that these finals weren't going to have good ratings, as if that was supposed to insult either team. There was a weird obsession with TV ratings from people who didn't work for the league or networks. I said it then and I'll say it now. If you don't work for the NBA or ABC, why do you care about finals ratings? But let's just move on to the finals. Now I want to talk about the presentation first because it wasn't great. The finals logo wasn't actually on the court, the scoreboard was smaller and less detailed, and we didn't even get to see the lineup introductions before the game. It just showed a little video package and then they cut to the court. I'm not going to fully go into my ways of fixing this because I did that in my 2024 finals video, but all I'll say is that this could have been way better. I guarantee you they would have went all out if the Lakers and Celtics made it. Game 1 was rough. Remember earlier when I talked about the Heat having no size? The Nuggets sure as hell knew about that. It was impossible to stop their offense because Bam was our only big that could do anything defensively. Miami's small lineup was barbecue chicken for Jokic, Aaron Gordon, and even MPJ at times. Whenever they would try to double Jokic, he was always able to pass to an open shooter who would normally knock their shot down. If they wanted to win, they would have to get up to Denver's level, and they just couldn't. Bam played well, but he was the only one that showed up when it really mattered. Jimmy was nowhere, Max Strus went 0 for 10, and the lights looked to be too bright for Caleb Martin. It was clear that the role players could not afford to have an off night if the team wanted to have any chance in the series. Game 2 was very strange. What was an 11-point lead quickly turned into a 15-point deficit, so it just looked to be more of the same. But they would start to slowly chip away at this lead. Going into the 4th, they were down by 8. Not great, but a lot more manageable. They were able to charge back thanks to the efforts of, checks notes, Gabe Vincent and Duncan Robinson? I swear these undrafted players were either completely useless or all-star talent. Bam and Jimmy would take the reins, doing enough to secure a 111-108 win, tying the series at 1 game apiece. Even if they had really tried to give that game away, this was still huge. It was the first time Denver had lost at home in the playoffs, and it was the first time that the Heat had beaten the Nuggets in Denver since 2016. The momentum was now fully in the hands of the Heat. Tied 1-1 heading back home, they could actually take control of the series if they kept this level of play up. So, what did they do in this homestand? Just lay a massive egg. Jokic and Murray put up ridiculous stat lines in Game 3. They became the first teammates in NBA history to put up 30-point triple-doubles in the same game. It just felt unfair. They even got a nice game from Christian Brown. What does Miami get? Okay games from Jimmy, Bam, and Martin while everyone else turns into pumpkins. Every time the Heat would go on a run and make it a game again, the Nuggets would respond with an even bigger run. Miami had no consistent offensive weapons besides Jimmy and Bam. Now, take everything I just said and make Aaron Gordon be the one to cook us, and you have Game 4. The depth was a little better, but we could not hit our threes, which couldn't be said for Denver. Every time the Heat would try to make a run and get back in the game, the Nuggets would always respond with a 3, sucking the life out of the building. Murray wasn't great, but when you have Aaron Gordon and Bruce Brown combining for 48 points, it's okay to have an off night. Now being down 3-1, reality started to set in. This was an amazing run, but they just couldn't overcome that final hurdle. Going into Game 5, I figured it was going to be more of the same. Another horrible offensive game that would get out of hand after a big Nuggets run. But these guys just had to make it interesting. Miami was actually able to build a nice lead because Denver was down to play some prison ball. Well, Jokic wasn't. The lead did dwindle, but the Heat were still up going into the 4th. This was their game to win. Keep this up, and your season lives for another game. But then Bam had to get subbed out. I haven't mentioned Cody Zeller much in these playoffs because he was never good. He simply took up space on the court and allowed Bam to get a little rest. But his play during the finals? It was offensive to any race, gender, class, and creed. Anytime Bam got subbed out, the Nuggets would understandably target Zeller. Jokic would score on him with no issues whatsoever. He wasn't just barbecue chicken, he was advanced barbecue chicken. I'm bringing him up now because any momentum Miami had in this game immediately vanished when Zeller showed up. His first and only minute in this game saw him get scored on by Jokic and miss a layup, leading to another Nuggets 3. Down by 7 with around 4 minutes left, It looked like we were just lying down to die. But then we saw something that we hadn't seen in a while. Jimmy Butler was showing up in clutch time once again. Like Game 6 against Boston, he was horrible for the first 3 quarters, but he suddenly flipped a switch to make the shots drop. A personal 13-2 run occurred, and suddenly Miami had the lead. Once again, I was filled with hope and excitement. Just hold on and let this magical run continue. Yet this ended up being the final gasp for the Heat. Denver's defense was able to lock Jimmy down, and the season was over. The Nuggets were champions for the first time in franchise history, and the clock had finally struck midnight in South Beach. This was an amazing run, but like 2020, we were overmatched in the finals. Jokic was on another level, and they got enough help from the role players to get the job done. What makes this all even more annoying is that the Nuggets offense wasn't that great in this series. They only broke 110 points one time, and they only averaged around 104 points. The Heat just had an inconsistent offense that hardly decided to show up. Besides Jimmy and Bam, nobody else was reliable. The undrafted depth that was talked about so much was so bipolar. We never stood a chance when our bench would either score 40 points or 6 points. Even Jimmy had lost a step, likely because he was still dealing with a nagging ankle injury. Even if he was fully healthy, I don't think the outcome would have changed. That wouldn't have fixed the awful offense and depth, or the lack of size that led to so many Denver runs. This run wasn't supposed to happen. Literally every single thing had to go right in order for this team to go far, and we were able to catch lightning in a bottle, at least until we got to the biggest stage. At this point of the Jimmy Butler era, despite some shortcomings and frustrations, this has still been an extremely successful stretch. 4 straight playoff appearances, 3 trips to the conference finals, and 2 underdog runs to the finals. The future of this team still looked bright. The championship window could stay open if they just added one more piece. One more source of star-level offense, and we could be right back in this spot next year, hopefully on the right end of things. Little did they know the roller coaster that awaited them in the offseason and the years following this Cinderella run. But that is where we will start next time, when I show how the Miami Heat failed Jimmy Butler. What'd you all think of this retrospective? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch y'all later.
We had enough. Next year, we will have enough. And we're going to be right back in the same situation, and we're going to get it done.